and the whole thing is about the importance of strategic planning. So,
Very good.
welcome everybody to DistruptEDtv, where even the smallest ideas can have a big impact on your school and on your students. And our guest today is Dr. Jeff Moore, who is the superintendent of Hunterdon Central Regional High School. Jeff, it's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
And the disruptive idea, and it's somewhat disruptive, it's really for school administrators. And so for school administrators out there who are caught in the day-to-day struggle to comply with mandates and balance the books, Jeff is here today to talk about the value of a longer range, let's say, strategic planning program. Do I have that?
That's right. Yeah, and I think in our as we started talking about that earlier, you know, this notion that the term is cold, and that it puts you in this lockstep sort of march forward, this notion of a plan, but it's far from that. It's far from that. I think what we have to do is really go back. Gosh, I think you got to go back to the purpose of American schooling, really, to find where this idea comes from, and that takes us a little far back. But when you look at if you think of, say, our Constitution as a strategic plan, then the preamble is its mission statement, right? And so in there they talk about, you know, securing the blessings of liberty for our posterity. So it's really, even though our Constitution doesn't talk about education, this notion that there's an educational mission to preserve for the next generations. And so it's baked into our national mandate for schools that we have schools that are aligned to a national mission of securing the blessings of liberty, promoting the general welfare, all those things that are at our root. And I think over the years we've really lost the paradigm of what our purpose is as schools. So we go day to day. We fulfill mandates, we balance the books, we educate kids, we do the best we can, we have victories all over the school. But that maneuver, that work that brings us all together and pushes us forward in the same direction, that's something that educational leaders really have to work hard toward, and they have to engage their communities in comprehensive processes to kind of forge that stuff. So sense of purpose is something that I worry folks in the profession have lost on a day-to-day basis, and that's where strategic planning comes in, to forge that, and then to build the initiatives that carry you forward with your community on those sorts of things.
Now the first, I'm remembering, I'm old enough to remember a lot of stuff, but in particular, the first President Bush, going all the way back to that first term, had a vision thing, an issue, the whole concept of a vision. The whole, I mean, a lot of people are so lost in the day-to-day that they really don't consider that, isn't that right?
I think so, and if you go back to that time period too, in education, so you go back into the 80s and 90s, and the conversation in education as the standardization, as the standards movement really begins to gain steam, you're talking about students mastering information, and that kind of evolved into students, literacy and mastery, bringing us into No Child Left Behind. I think we in the profession become really subject and almost unimaginatively so, subject to these mandates to push on these needles of student achievement as they're reflected in tests. I think over those decades, we lost sight of how we might measure the other kinds of initiatives and victories that we have in schools, how we approach goals of equity, of opportunity, of really personalizing the experience so that every student can build their adulthood before they graduate from high school. That's where strategic planning comes in, I think, and I think it's an important time right now as the profession in some ways feels like it's waking up from this fever dream of standards and testing and has maybe a moment right now to reclaim those sorts of goals and paradigms for itself, to do that kind of good work for kids. I'm not going to suggest ever that standards and tests don't have a role for us.
Nobody would.
And I think we'd be fools to say that. I had one of my first supervisors used to tell me that the tests are certainly measuring something, or else everybody would get the same score. And so they have value. I just don't know that we've figured out exactly how they contribute to those larger things that we want to do.
Too much emphasis on the test sometimes, and not on the other things.
Not important. And that's a good point. And the good point here, as I'm imagining it, is if all there were If all we had to worry about were performance on tests, then one school can do a strategic plan and then just photocopy it, and every other school can follow the same plan.
Right.
Every school has an individual personality. It serves an individual community. It has a unique profile of students. No two strategic plans should be alike.
Right. And I think that even goes back also again to where education fits in the national priority. That it's not in the Constitution because even from our earliest theorists, there was this importance of local control and local needs, and that schools needed to develop solutions for the problems that express themselves locally, and arm and equip students to move forward and solve those problems when they be. And that's going to be different everywhere you go. So even here in New Jersey, we have home rule, we have local boards of education that have a lot of control over how schools proceed into their programs. I think that whole notion of different schools will have different strategic priorities is written into the fabric of what we do. And it's written into our governance. There are certainly things that we all have to have in common. There are certainly standards that we have to strive for, but I don't think at the expense of community goals. I don't think at the expense of the individualized program for students and their own personal goals. And particularly when that standardization might be a one-size-fits-all that works against your equity goals. You know? So I think we make a mistake in assuming there should be a national curriculum or a national program or maybe some national priorities, but the flexibility should be there for us to proceed.
All the way down to the local level, and that really is kind of the point. Now, Jeff, advocating the people who watch our program. I am a school administrator. I have to worry about my teachers. I have to worry about my students. I have to worry about the budget. I have to worry about the school board. I've got a lot to worry about. How much time is this going to take?
Well, and that's always the question, I think, with a lot of innovations, is that there is this upfront investment in the work that you have to do to bring everybody together. But the power of planning, the power of being really focused about your goals and your mission is that it allows you to say no down the roads to a lot of things that might not be good fits. It allows you to look at mandates and say, not that, oh gosh, here's another thing we have to do, but here's a structure that the state or that the federal government is offering us to help us do our work a little bit better. Here's something that we can bring into our strategic planning structure and maybe with the force of resources from the state move forward a little more efficiently. So strategic planning in the long run saves you that time. It creates focus, it helps you crystallize your efforts around your goals, and I think in the long run then that you're not scattered. I mean, a highly functioning school district, if it doesn't have a strategic plan, but it can still be highly functioning, right, against the measurements we have. You might have 1,000 people with 1,000 different good ideas. It's like a flock of birds flying in 1,000 different directions. So strategic planning gets you to that point where that flock is in a nice formation moving forward, and it moves efficiently.
You're building a nice foundation on which to build upon.
And that's it. Okay, we have to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk some more about, now we've got that foundation laid, what's the first thing we do? So we'll be right back with more DistruptEDtv right after this.
Stick around. Let's go.
Welcome back, everybody, to DistruptEDtv. My name is Al Cini.
I'm still Joe Asamendi.
You are always Joe Asamendi, and that never changes. It's so good to have you here.
Good, I appreciate that.
And you know who else is still here and still
here?
Still Jeff Moore. Jeff Moore. Jeff, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for talking about strategic planning because it sounds scary, but based on what you just described in the first segment of our program. If I build a strategic plan, what I'm really doing is making my progress moving forward more efficient because I'm not remaking the same decisions over and over again. And it's that uncertainty that really takes the time. So it might take a little bit of time to make a strategic plan, but ultimately I'll save time if I have one. You just tell me, advocating, assuming that I'm one of those guys out there who might be listening, one of those people, men or women leading a school, where do I start?
Well, and you're right. So the goal here is to focus on purpose. And there's common language and common understanding around purpose so that folks know why they come to the school every day. And I'm going to make it a little scarier because you can do a strategic plan in a weekend, and a lot of districts do it in that really tight time frame because they feel like I need it, I have to have it done quickly, and I can't spend a lot of time or money doing it. So weekends, retreats, we're done. But I can't really do it that way. That's not my training, and it's not my experience really to do it that way. So to make it a little scarier, I spend months doing a plan. But it's really rewarding and really fascinating work. So you want to start at the top level with mission statement and vision statement, and really unearthing what are the core values in your organization. Often with a district that hasn't had a strategic plan in a long time, there is some existing mission statement or some existing documentation from accreditation or something in the past that you can draw on and start to ask people to look at. And so what resonates with them? You're out then with parents and community members and staff and kids, and you're saying, what resonates with you here? And from that, you're getting the beginnings then of the threads that you need to keep going in sort of the successor mission. And then it's gathering committees together. I will, for example, right now at Hunterdon Central, we're gathering our first committee of staff members and administrators together to take all of the stuff that we've had in those other conversations about our prior mission statement. And we're going to sit down and go through some protocols. They look a lot like PLC protocols. Go through some protocols to iron out a new mission statement. From there, we'll ask ourselves, all right, what sort of promises do we need to make in order to achieve that mission? And we'll come out of that with maybe a half a dozen or so promises. And I use that term, promises, because it's a strong word. It scares folks a little bit, but we all get up every morning and we look in the mirror and we get ready to go into work, and we call it a calling. You know, so we ought to put our money where our mouth is with a strong word like promises. They aren't just goals, they're promises. So, and then from those promises, we start to dive into theories of action. So if we have promises, what are the ifs and thens that we need to do as an organization? If we do X, Y, and Z, then students will be able to display behaviors or achievement or take advantage of opportunities that are lined up to our promises, which flow out of our mission. And then in the last stages of all of this, we get down into the nitty-gritty of, all right, what are the individual programs and projects that we want to pursue to kind of create those deliverables on those if statements. All along the way, what are the data points that we're going to measure? And that's a tricky thing, you know, to keep that all aligned, because in some cases you find yourself inventing new data points that don't really even exist yet.
Part of the process.
Yeah, and another piece there is just staying honest and staying focused on that mission up top, because it can very easily veer off and get into territory that you hadn't accounted for up top. So you have to be ready to kind of go back and revisit those top level statements, but you also have to stay true and honest to them and what the folks who framed them intended. So it's a tough process.
Well, but it's an important process, and I think, and it's not as difficult as a lot of people might imagine it is. Now, you mentioned things like mission statements and vision statements and brand promises. Essentially, it's just like in the business world. A brand, service or product brand makes promises. There are things that are associated with a school that are promises. I'm not going to ask you to give us examples because we only have half an hour. But at the end of the program, you get to look into your camera and tell people how to reach you. I'm assuming you'll have examples to show them and ideas that you can offer. So I'm sort of speaking in advance. Jeff is willing to help you if you'd like to get started on this journey.
Absolutely.
He's done it, and he's willing to help you. But you also mentioned something else in your backgrounds when you were talking about this. You don't do this alone. It's not like you disappear for 3 months and nobody can call Jeff and we're not going to hear from him again until 3 months from now. You work with a whole bunch of stakeholders at your school to do this, don't you?
Absolutely. And if you're doing it comprehensively, you have to get into all the nooks and crannies of your system to reach those folks who have who hold a stake in this process. You know? And you have to have conversations about over and over again. You know, the importance of our work here, the reason we're here is for the students who come to our school every day. There are lots of opportunities as you go deeper into the plan to account for professional development and other things for the adults who come to work every day. But you've got to stay focused in the planning and on that top level language on what the deliverables are for students, for kids.
Well, that's who we're making the promise to, after
And
all.
that's the goal.
And it's hard in the beginning when you're bringing folks together because sometimes they come together with things that they want for themselves, right? So you're really appealing to their better angels, in a sense, to kind of stay focused on what our real mission is here for the students. And you can disarm a lot of folks through that conversation because you really get to some passion and some visionary conversation, some passionate and visionary conversation about why do we come to work every day.
Okay.
And you can look at mission statements over the decades and you can sort of tell when they came from based on, so there's mastery, there's evolving global society. You can find these. There's passion has been important recently, and student efficacy. But those are, even though they sound sometimes like trite mission statement kinds of words, those are the important
Those are the words that capture
fulcrums.
the energy,
Yeah.
the reason why we come to
And
work.
you will spend in some of those strategic planning committees an hour. So just fleshing out what does that word
Just fleshing
mean
out what
to
does that
us?
mean and
Yeah.
what does that mean to us.
And-
So then if I'm a superintendent out there and I'm thinking, I really do need a strategic plan. Just having a budget isn't enough. Do I have that? I'm assuming I don't have that first conversation. I really need a strategic plan with myself in the mirror.
Right.
My first conversation is, I guess, with the senior leaders of my faculty, maybe with my principal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think your community and your board knows if they need this or not. As I came into Hunterdon Central, looking to see just this past July as superintendent, they're arriving and looking to see, is this district a match for the work that I like to do and the skills that I bring? You see, you can gauge pretty quickly whether there's a hunger in your district for this kind of work.
Great.
But I think right now this is something that all districts are interested in.
Right.
It's a question that all practitioners are interested in. Why are we doing this every day?
Right.
And the structure of our profession is such that we ought to have the capability to answer that locally with priorities that are really important to the folks who are stakeholders in our
We're
work.
coming up on a break.
Okay,
So
great.
we'll be right back with Jeff Moore after this message, more on DistruptEDtv.
Yep, stay with us.
Thanks.
Welcome back, everybody, to DistruptEDtv. My name is Al Cini.
I'm Joe Osamendi.
This is Joe Asamendi, and we're talking today with Jeff Moore, very special guest, the superintendent at Hunterdon Central.
Hunterdon Central.
Okay,
Yep.
and we're talking about the importance of strategic planning, building a strategic plan. And my question, I guess, going into this segment, Jeff, is that as a superintendent making a strategic plan, what am I taking into consideration? What has to be included in my plan?
Well, goodness. So you and the framework I talk about with mission and promises and theories of action. I mean, that's what works for me and is going to work and is working right now in Hunterdon Central. So there's a lot of flexibility for folks to do what works for them there, certainly. But you want to come out of that process with specific calendared action plans that you're now promising to pursue over whatever the term of the plan is, 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is. Some of the things that
By the way, quick question: how long a term does it have to be?
I think that's up to, so I've 5 years sometimes gets you out too far these days, given the
Okay.
changes and shifts. You have to be careful that if there are mandates that are coming down the road and you know about them, that you have to account for them in your plan.
You want to
You want to weave them in and see how you can use them as tools to
Okay.
move your mission forward. Otherwise, those become reasons to not do your plan, and that's one of the most tragic things.
That's tragic, and you don't do it, and
That's right.
So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to derail you.
That's
Go,
all right.
Go back into what you included.
But one of the things that flows out of it sometimes too is this good conversation about what do we believe about learning in this school district, and so if we're saying this is what's important for our students to be able to do when they leave our system, then we have to next make statements about, well, this is how we believe then that we ought to engage them in learning. So theories of learning start to flow out of this, whether you want to call it that
Right.
formally or not. Folks start to get a sense of well, this is what our classroom then ought to look like if we're going to fulfill this mission. And where technology and personalization come into that right now, it's hard to write a mission statement today without thinking about...
Without including that.
Yes, without thinking about how technology is going to impact kids in the future and what they're going to have to do and what
Sure.
they're going to have to help us understand as we grow into our retirement and all of that. You know, so it's...
Well, this obviously matters to you. Why don't you talk about both? Talk about technology
Yeah.
first and then talk about personalization.
Well, and it's not just the fact that it's that world of you know, students will graduate into a world where they'll have X number of careers.
Right.
Or, you know, it's not just that. I think we're seeing lines between communities that are blurred by technology in ways, so that all of that stuff that I talked about these local solutions, we now have to build them in a way that students have skills to carry out
Right.
into communities far and wide. We're talking about new ways to collaborate. Students are engaged in social media every day, but we don't know how to, and I think the larger population doesn't necessarily know how to use these tools to their maximum efficiency to help people collaborate. So we need to prepare students to help write those rules as they graduate. So technology, communication, collaboration, those become really important focal points in a strategic plan. I've always been dissatisfied when we implement technologies in schools and all we're doing is coming up with a more efficient way to do school.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, so
there's more of a focus on creativity and less of a focus on
Yeah.
efficiency.
Yeah, and earlier when I spoke about this, you know, information literacy and then mastery of the 80s and 90s,
Right.
and as we move and have moved, we
The
still talk
problem
about the
with the vision
21st century
thing.
like
Yeah.
we're not already in it, but we're all 20 years into it.
Right.
We're talking about information artistry. We're talking about students being able to create and construct knowledge in disciplines and not just parrot it or mimic it or just work with it. They need to be able to create and add to the knowledge base and to the skills base of what we all do as humans.
Now we're talking about personalization, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah, there's no cookie cutter approach to this. You really have to take and individually get your own strategic plan based on what your district really wants to accomplish.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Right.
it.
And ultimately, this becomes an equity question for
Right.
students in a school. And that's where personalization goes for me is, you know, there was a time when we looked at standards and we said, the equity mission is to make sure that all kids achieve standards. And I think now we start to wonder if that in that one size fits all approach, all
Right.
kids need to achieve standards by this point, if we're actually working against the equity interests of a more personalized model where you know, some students are going to go this way and some are going to go that way, but
Right.
they're all going to find themselves and they're all going to contribute to a larger movement in our district to bring everybody forward.
Right.
And we're going to respect how they want to move forward and where they discover they want to be when they graduate. And so that
Sure.
starts to speak to a different kind of model.
Exactly.
Not every student's going to master everything. Right, and I think it's a mistake, especially given all the anxiety and stress and everything else that we talk about with kids. I think it's a mistake to say that we have to get them all there.
Right.
You know, so I think we need to be more respectful of what they want to do. We need to help them figure out what they want to do, and strategic planning gives you the abilities to write structures into your district that help surface all that for kids.
Okay, so you sold me. I'm
Okay.
a school superintendent. I'm going to take the time to write a 2 or 3 or 5 year plan or whatever I think is appropriate for my school. You're going to help me later on, and you're going to tell me how to reach you, and you're going to give me some examples and maybe some formats I could follow. When I'm finished, who's going to read this plan?
Well, and that's it. So you have different sort of presentations of this plan. And on some level, so many people have been involved in helping you write it and have been giving you feedback on draft material that they're already familiar with, all right, the mission, the vision, the promises, all of that. But it has to be user-friendly. So some of my pet peeves in communications out of schools are we like to use passive voice a lot and we like to use jargon a lot, and I think those things get in the way of direct communication of what we want to do. So your plan has to be user-friendly, it has to direct, user-friendly, layperson-friendly language.
Right.
This is what we want to do. Otherwise, you can't be confident that what you're saying is something that the person on the other side of the table is invested in as well. You know, I don't know what any of this means.
Plain and simple.
Yeah, so it's all over your website. It's all over your materials, your mugs, everywhere you have it. You have these pithy things that come back to your strategic plan. But I think most important and the toughest part of this is there have to be common messages coming from all of the folks that everybody in the community deals with. Teachers need to understand the plan. They need to be invested in it.
Really?
They
Right.
need to be reflecting on their classroom practices and how it aligns to the goals of the plan.
Right.
Back to school nights, what they're saying to parents, if it's not, if it's out of whack from what the community expects because of your plan, then you've got a problem.
Well,
You know,
that's it.
so-
I mean, it's not an audience, it's part
Yeah.
of the plan.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's incorporating the audience, the people who read my plan
Right.
in the plan.
Right.
Is really a key element of all this. It's not something I just hung up there for you to come and read.
Right.
It's something that we all take part in. And that's,
Yeah.
well, we're coming up on the end of our program. So here's your chance to tell all the people out there who are wondering how to do a strategic plan, how to reach you and why they should call you. That's your camera right there.
Good. So the best place to follow the work that we're doing at Hunterdon Central and to touch base with us about any ideas that you have or any questions that you have is really at my Twitter account. So it's Jeff Moore EDD on Twitter. That's Jeff Moore EDD. That's the best first place to go to reach out to me.
That's great. And if they go there, they'll get links to other information. So that's a good place to start, or they could direct message you with a question. they
Absolutely.
have.
Absolutely.
Jeff Moore,
All
it
right.
was absolutely
Thank
a
you.
pleasure having you on
Pleasure meeting you.
DistruptEDtv
Thank
today.
you.
It was great. That was a terrific conversation
Well,
about.
I enjoyed it.
Good.
That was a lot of fun for us. And we hope one or two of the ideas that Jeff shared with us today could be helpful in your school or in your school district to make a difference. Little ideas make a big difference on DistruptEDtv. Thank you for joining us. My name is Alcini.
I'm still Joe Osamendi.
It's
Absolutely.
always a pleasure having you here.
Pleasure.
And you're still Joe Asman.
I'm still Joe Osamendi.
And Jeff Moore, thanks
Great,
again
thank
for
you.
joining us today.
Thank
Thank you for joining us all, and please join us again for the next DistruptEDtv
Definitely.
episode. Bye now.
Great. Thanks. Excellent.
All right, good.